Hello, this is Basil. You've undoubtedly heard of Johnnie Walker. The whiskey brand he started in Scotland, in the 1800s has spread around the world, and today, is the #1 brand with over 200 million bottles sold every year. Brand is the operative word here, and it relates not only to the Johnnie Walker of distillery fame, but to another Johnnie Walker who lived in the same time period. One who was born in the United States, to be exact, in the Cape Cod town of Harwich. Our John Walker and his brand does not make a happy story, filled with pleasant evenings of cigars, overstuffed chairs, and cocktails of Johnnie Walker Red and Ginger Ale. Our Johnnie's brand had little of merriment to it. And as for fame, our John had lots of it, if you put the word in front of it, as in infamy. Though our Johnnie's brand became associated with evil, fire, death and destruction, the fault was not of his own making. He was simply born at the wrong time. Had he lived a century later, he would most likely have a holiday named after him, as do the US presidents, as well as individuals like Martin Luther King and Cristoforo Colombo of Italy, known as Columbus in the US. So what was this terrible brand of Harwich Johnnies? Before I draw back the theatre curtains, and reveal him on center stage, let's look at his early life. He was born on Cape Cod, a horseshoe-shaped peninsula of Massachusetts, that crawls 64 miles out into the deep Atlantic Ocean. Until it morphed into a tourist destination in the 20th century, it was a land of salt farms, cranberry bogs and fishermen. Harwich Johnnie was born just as the 1700s turned the page, and became the 1800s. He was an able student but left school at 14, and for a few years he plied all the trades available to young Cape Codders. Wading knee-deep in flooded cranberry bogs he teased stubborn, straggling berries until they let go of the vines binding them and floated up to the surface, joining the majority of the fruits which departed of their own accord. Like a rodeo cowboy, he cast a large rope onto the water and corralled thousands of berries, forming a big circle on the water with the rope, guiding them to shore for packing and sale. For 2 seasons John Walker labored in the cranberry bogs, and found it somewhat interesting, but decided it was not for him. The salt works were even less exciting. During the late 1700s and early 1800s Cape Cod was a leading producer of salt. In those days before refrigeration, salt was one of the most important commodities in the United States. It was used to preserve much of the food consumed in the country, as well as to preserve most of the catch by the thousands of Cape Cod fishermen. Codfish caught on the Cape were salted, boxed, and sent all over the world. Getting the salt was the hard part. Large companies spent boatloads of money on giant furnaces and pots. They filled their containers with seawater, and boiled away the liquid, to obtain pure salt. It was a costly process, and even though the end product carried a high price tag, the profits gained by the companies were fairly small. In the late 1700s, a man everybody laughingly called Sleepy, changed everything, when he came up with a new way to harvest salt, which would become known as white gold. The process was so simple, it's a wonder it wasn't thought of long before Sleepy John Sears came up with it. John lived in Dennis, a town on the Harwich border. He was called Sleepy because of his habit of falling asleep anytime, anywhere. It made him a poor fisherman, but gave him plenty of time to dream. One day, while napping, he had the outrageous dream of digging a large but shallow hole in his yard, and filling it with seawater. When he woke up, he stayed awake for a long time, long enough to dig out a huge rectangular space, enclosed by heavy logs and flooded with water from the ocean, which was barely 30 yards from his house. While John sat in the sun in front of his square pond, nature did the work for him, evaporating all the water, and leaving him with about 1 cup of pure salt, for each gallon of water evaporated. Sleepy John Sears soon refined his system and became a wealthy man, and the founder of revitalized, important industry. John Walker, however, labored in the salt works for only a few weeks before deciding he had enough. As a very young man he signed on with a fishing vessel, and knew as soon as the vessel cast off its shoreline, that the ocean life was meant for him. The sea was good to Harwich John. From deckhand he rose to mate, and finally to captain of a fine fishing vessel. For more than 2 decades, he sailed the waters from Cape Cod, all the way to Florida and on to the Caribbean Sea. Over time, John became increasingly angered at the way people of darker skin color were treated. In Cape Cod, he saw few people of color, and no racial strife, but in the broader United States, and in the world, grim battles over slavery were looming. In the 1830s slavery was abolished, in the British West Indies, but the United States was still suffering under its evil grip. Many of John's crewmen were people of color and he came to be horrified at their treatment. Becoming increasingly vocal in his dislike for slavery, John took action in 1844. At the time, he was in Florida, the southernmost outpost of what in 2 decades, would become the Confederated States of America. Disgusted at the way the slaves were being treated, as well as by their squalid living conditions, he acquired a ship, actually, just a tiny open boat, and set off for the British West Indies with 7 slaves who would be free if the journey ended well. It didn't. Captain John Walker became ill midway to the Indies. With Walker delirious, the slaves who had no boating or navigational skills, had no idea of what to do or where to go. The open boat drifted aimlessly for days. Supplies as well as hope were running low. Captain Walker was alive, but still only semi-conscious. Facing imminent death by starvation, if they didn't capsize and drown first, they were rescued by a passing sloop which deposited them in Key West. The slaves were sent back to slavery, while John Walker was put in irons aboard a warship, and transported to a prison in Pensacola, where he was chained to the floor of a bare cell, and given a minimum of health care, and sparse bits of food. Put on trial for his crimes of assisting coloreds to escape their lawful slavery, he was forced to serve 1 year in the bare cell, not only chained to the floor, but also deprived of light. In addition, he was forced to undergo a unique form of torture. During his incarceration, a small group of abolitionists in Boston were working feverishly to get him freed. Finally, after the group paid a large fine, Johnny Walker of Cape Cod was freed. He lived another 40 years afterward, passing away in 1878, just shy of 80 years. He lived long enough to see a horrible conflict among a nation split in 2, and then reunited after a devastating civil war in which almost 1 million soldiers died, out of the total national population of only 31 million. He took some comfort in knowing that the bloodshed freed 4 million souls from slavery. But what about the brand of Johnny Walker? The Scottish Johnny Walker's brand, is his name on a bottle of whiskey. Harwich Johnny's brand, was a real brand. In addition to all the torture, and deprivation of more than 12 months in jail, he was sentenced to be branded on the hand, with 2 letters, S, and S. The letters meant, slave stealer. Over the years, an increasingly large group of people of all colors, said that the brand, S, meant, slave savior. In 1878, a statue of John was erected in Michigan where he lived in later life, and a plaque on Cape Cod where he was born. One of America's greatest poets, John Greenleaf Whittier, praised him in his poem The Brand. Please permit me to read a few lines of that poem. Lift that manly right hand, bold plowman of the wave. Your branded palm shall prophesy salvation to the slave. Hold up its fire-wrought language, that who reads may feel his heart swell strong, within him, his sinews change to steel. Hold it up before our sunshine, up against our northern air. Ho! Men of Massachusetts, for the love of God, look there. That's the end of my story of the 2 brands of Johnny Walker. One is for sipping, and the other for inspiration. Thanks for listening.
The story of the other Johnny Walker is true, though I wish I could say that it was fiction. The video was written and produced by Bill Russo, who hopes you'll hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more films on a wide variety of subjects. Until next time, have a good life. Make it so.
Copyright 2019 by CCA Media.